response to COVID-19 and the consistent and distressing statistics around the well-being of musicians and people working in the music industry, this is a very special instalment of Sound Advice. We'll talk about the challenges and triggers that artists face around things like financial uncertainty, alcohol and substance issues, bandmate tensions, and irregular work hours, all in the context of the post-COVID-19 reality. I'd like to acknowledge that this panel is taking place in the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi everyone, my name is Mel Chang. I'm an artist manager at One Louder Entertainment. I work on the day-to-day activities of Paul Kelly, Ballpark Music, and Alex the Astronaut. I'm an admitted lawyer of the Supreme Court of New South Wales, and I also teach at a tertiary level at the Australian Institute of Music. So thank you to Music New South Wales for having me tonight. And on behalf of Music New South Wales, I'd like to thank the presenting partners, who are Create New South Wales, APRA AMCOS, and Support Act. So about the panel tonight, I'll be talking with one half of Vallis Alps, Parissa Tosif, Clive Miller from Support Act, and Psychologist Amy Radford. So let's dive straight in. I've got a question first up for Parissa. So in your journey as an artist in the music industry, have you or someone close to you experienced mental health issues?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had experiences of anxiety throughout this career and in general at differing levels of severity depending on what I'm up to at that time and what's happening. I think this is such an interesting industry because the more you progress and the more success you attain, the more your world kind of turns upside down a little bit. So you're exposed to things that are so abnormal in a sense. So performing in front of thousands of people or touring constantly or doing publicity or doing these things that maybe things that your immediate family and friends have never experienced or you're going through for the first time. And as amazing as many of them are, they're very much new experiences constantly and new adventures. And I think that's always been something for me to take time to adjust to. And when I see, friends in other industries get promotions and things, I'm like, not much has changed for them, It's like maybe a better office, more people managing. But every time we reach new goals, there's a whole new set of environments and people and things to learn about. And again, it's such a wonderful career in the industry, but it does call on constant self-reflection and growth, and there are definitely times of anxiety. I think for a long time I just would assume that the heartbeat and the sweat and those kinds of signs of anxiety were just things that I just had to deal with, but over time acknowledging them was the first thing as signs of anxiety, and then sharing the feelings I was having with my team and with my family was really helpful. And now I've come to find that my anxiety signals a need for things to grow and change. I don't actually see it now, having learnt to manage it through many different channels. I see it as a almost useful thing.
Right. And then you mentioned, you lived a different life and a different experience to people around you. Do you find it helpful having a support network of people who have a similar experience to you, or do you feel like you can talk openly about your experiences with people outside of the industry?
The music industry in Australia is really supportive, and I feel really lucky to have met so many wonderful musicians and crew and people who share in the same struggles and in the same joys. So that's been a huge comfort. But also, I think having friends and hobbies and a life outside of music has also been really helpful for me personally. And I think turning to those friends that maybe don't have the same reality is also nice because it gives you a bit of perspective and reminds you of the world as a whole and your work in the context of that. And I think that's been really nice too, yeah.
And then Amy and Clive, what are you seeing as the most common things that people are struggling with at this time?
Yeah, well, look, I think the what we're hearing is a pretty consistent message, and that's that they've all lost their income, that all of their plans for this year all came to a crashing halt in mid-March. People suddenly don't have income. They're struggling to pay their rent. They're struggling to pay their bills, and that's obviously concerning a high level of anxiety. And I think people are really there's concern about careers as well. I mean, there's not only just the short-term immediate challenge of how do I pay the rent or how do I put food on the table, but, for a lot of people, I think, Parissa, you mentioned that you had performed at South by Southwest, and obviously that's where everyone was heading in March and those sorts of things. So they're not just single shows, they're parts of big plans that have been put in place that are going to position artists, hopefully, as a springboard to the next stage in their careers.
Yeah, there is, I guess, that financial implication, but also the health implications as well. I know with some of my older artists, we've had to discuss ethically, can we bring older artists together during this time, knowing that older people are more at risk. And what about Amy?
Yeah, look, I'd certainly agree with what Clive's saying. Certainly anxiety levels are up for just about anyone, I think. Even people that wouldn't necessarily experience a lot of anxiety normally are really struggling with that at the moment. Depression as well, understandably, because I think for a lot of performers, so much, all that certainty, all those plans for the year have dropped, and it's not just a case of, okay, well, these things have to be rearranged or we have to put that aside until then. There's this unknown, and that is really provoking of anxiety for anyone, that sense of unknown and uncertainty. So it's not just what happens with this next performance, but it's what happens, when do we get back to normal? Will I be able to do things in a year? Will my career ever be the same, And even if some of those thoughts are not necessarily that realistic, they snowball, So people are saying to me, I wonder whether I'll ever get back, or I just had that first big break, or I just got that role, and all of a sudden that's been taken away, and they're wondering when, they're just sitting waiting. So I think that's, can be really challenging. I'm also noticing for anyone that's had previous mental health challenges, a lot of those challenges are coming back up now. So for people with substance abuse issues or eating disorders or, just depression, anxiety in their past, that kind of thing, they're struggling a lot more to manage those symptoms at the moment. And I think the other thing is grief. I think that's the thing that it's easy to forget, but there's a grief of everything lost and of lost potential that's, sometimes we can forget. Yeah.
And I think what's exacerbating that, to some degree as well, is then everybody's having to deal with being in isolation. People are more isolated, they're cut off from their social networks, and that kind of makes life a little bit difficult.
Something I've noticed in my social circle is people talking about being productive during this time and being creative. I know a lot of artists feel pressure to be releasing new music and releasing albums. I've got friends signing up for university courses, or just learning to bake sourdough. Seems to be a tedious process.
Very trendy.
Do you feel you have clients or have been experiencing that amongst your music circles?
Yeah.
There is that pressure to do something during this time?
Yeah, I think there can be, and it can be a pressure, right? I think for some people to have something productive that they can focus on and put their attention on, that they find rewarding and keeps them in the present moment, can be really useful. But for other people, that can be a real pressure, and it's a case of knowing what's right for you, what you need at that particular time. And if you don't feel like being productive, or you're just not in that space yet, or you just need time to grieve and to process it all, then that's okay as well. I think that's something I notice a lot, this assumption that, now's your opportunity to build that new skill, or to work on that thing, anything that you've maybe not had the time to do usually. And that may be the case for some, but it's not for everyone, I think. It's for some people that's not realistic at the moment, and that's okay too.
Yeah, not everyone's going to walk out with rocking hard abs and amazing chef abilities. With the pandemic lockdown, the live music and a lot of the music industry has effectively been decimated. We're still unsure when the music industry may be able to pick up. It does feel like live music venues will be some of the last places to open. So this uncertainty about when we can resume our normal lives can be quite overwhelming. But financial uncertainty is something that's not really new to the music industry. I think a lot of people have experienced this on and off throughout their careers. So to everyone, What makes it such an insecure industry in the first place? And how do you think COVID-19 has exacerbated these weaknesses?
I mean, careers are very uncertain in the music industry. Even if you have success, you're really only ever as good as your last hit single, really. And so you have to keep delivering. I think the environment in which people perform obviously can be challenging. Touring can be difficult. It can take people away from home. People can suffer loneliness. They can suffer stage fright. You know, there's a lot of challenges that you're not going to find if you're, working for the bank or doing, that sort of job. And but
You get your salary, your fortnightly salary paid to you.
Exactly. And I think it is just that regularity of income. So often, when we really think about, well, why is it that people in the music industry and in the arts have such high levels of anxiety and depression compared to people across the rest of society, then I think it really comes down to the fact that they just don't get paid on a regular basis. And that's a really scary thing to have to be dealing with. Perhaps when you're younger, you can deal with it a little bit better. When you get older, suddenly, if you're crew, for example, and you've spent your whole life essentially carrying black boxes and being really physical, and then you find your body starts to give out and maybe you can't do that job anymore, and you're still only 50, and you've got to think, well, now how am I going to survive until I'm 70 if I don't really have superannuation and I don't have a huge kind of financial nest egg to draw on.
I also think it's an interesting strength, though, as well. I was reflecting on this the other day, and for performers that are used to that uncertainty and that instability, when something like this hits, it's not as unfamiliar for them. They can actually go, and certainly with my clients, I'm trying to say to them, look, okay, we want to find that strength of, how can you understand that you can cope with this? We're always looking for those coping strategies. And for most of them, they can delve into the past and say, oh, well, actually, there's been times in the past where, we haven't had much money, or we've had to do this, or we've had, things that have cancelled that we've had to manage, and really building that resilience, So weirdly, that instability actually becomes that strength in this time.
Exactly. I think
we've done
to
this,
counter all of
there.
this, we have to recognise that people, I think, if we can generalise, people in the music industry, I mean, you have to be resilient. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there in the first place.
Yeah, that's resilience.
And also maybe this time has shown the resourcefulness that is possible, I think, when you are at the depths of your challenge, and all these concepts that exist usually, like instability and a lack of knowledge about future events. I think the creativity, if it's possible and if it's something that feels good, has been amazing. Like I've never seen so many incredible YouTube videos, so many authentic pieces of content from artists about them in their natural environment, without makeup, without anything, and just sharing about their lives, or sharing content, sharing music, being really creative. And I think that's a testament to the capacity of artists and musicians, and kind of the ability to rise above in some ways. And also kind of channeling that towards the community. I've seen a lot of artists actually using their talent to create a better situation for their audience by playing music, or by trying to uplift the lives of their audience. And I think whenever you do something that's so outward focused and for your community or for your audience, you naturally will feel uplifted and feel more joyful. So that's been really beautiful to see, actually.
Yeah, it's been amazing seeing many of the streaming opportunities pop up, and I guess new opportunities that probably wouldn't have existed prior to this time. So just jumping back on the uncertainty and anxiety around this period at the moment. So it comes at least in part from a loss of control, and especially during a lockdown, we are seeing a lot of people having to surrender their lives and essentially lose their sense of agency. So this is probably a question for Amy. What happens to us psychologically when we lose that sense of agency and that sense of control? And, what should we do to try and retain that to stay well?
Look, I think that there is a certain loss of control, and I think when something like this hits, we assume that loss is something that doesn't usually happen. But in reality, if we think about it, we're never usually that certain of what's going to be happening in the future anyway, right? These things just highlight that for us, I think, really make us realise, that actually we're not always in control. It's not always possible. Yeah, so I think although we do look for places that we can control, and it's okay to say if we are feeling anxious, what is there that we can control in that situation? Because there's so much at the moment we can't, and it's okay to look for those more present moment things where you can say, okay, well, I'm not sure when I'm going to be touring again, but I do know that I really want to work on that piece of music, and today I can just get in and work on that piece of music and do that, and that's something that is in my control. On the other hand, when we can't control things, we need to be able to practice that level of acceptance of going, this is actually out of my control at the moment and it feels uncomfortable and it's uneasy. But through owning that lack of control, I think rather than always searching for it and just saying, okay, this is hard right now, but it won't always feel this way, then we can actually, I suppose, relinquish some of that need to be in control of everything that's happening to us. I always say with acceptance, we know we need to realise acceptance isn't saying I like it and I want it to be that way. It's just saying this is how it is right now. And I can't change how it is right now. Yeah. So I'm going to own that I'm feeling uncomfortable with it. And I'm going to, sit with that for a little bit. And then I'm going to go and do what I can to manage the things that I am actually still in control of.
So Clive, one of the pragmatic steps that people can take is to actually approach Support Act and talk to them about the financial support that you can give as an organisation. So what role is Support Act playing in supporting the industry through this time?
Well, people can approach us on two levels. The first is to apply for short-term financial relief. We call that crisis relief. So that's when we provide people with financial support to pay the rent or to pay their utility bills, to get the car registered or pay a medical bill or whatever it is. And hopefully that will give people the opportunity to, I guess, just get back into control, kind of get through that crisis moment and maybe just get a handle on their finances or work out, perhaps how they've got to readjust their budget or take a deep breath and look at other opportunities. There's actually quite a number of areas that people can go to for financial support. There are grants that are available. APRA AMCOS has just announced a series of grants for artists, and the City of Sydney has had a series of grants available. So there's pockets of money around the place that people can also source if they are so inclined. So I guess that's how the crisis relief part of our services work. But then on the other side, we have the Support Act Wellbeing Helpline, and that's the free 24/7 phone counselling service that anybody in Australian music, and as of today, anybody working in the arts across Australia can call if they're concerned about any aspect of their mental health and well-being.
Fantastic. Now we'll move on to post-lockdown, hopefully post-COVID-19, back to normal life, hopefully. Travelling and touring, which can be challenging at the best of times. But as we gradually emerge from lockdown, we're being presented with a whole new set of concerns. So what were the main mental health issues that we were seeing being associated with touring and being a travelling artist? Might start with you, Parissa, being the artist on the panel.
This has been touched on a couple of times, but loneliness is an interesting one for a lot of people. When you're on the road, you're surrounded by people all the time, but you do miss home and you miss your comforts and you miss your close people a lot of the time, and that can be lonely, as exciting as it is and as wonderful as it is. Perhaps also the uncertainty of travel and the uncertainty of every night's show being different, or the audience and your setting, how your sleep's going to be, your diet's going to be. There's so many factors that contribute to feeling a little bit unsettled all the time, I think. But I think a huge one that I've experienced, and many friends we've talked about endlessly, is band tension, because you're amidst, like, you're literally with the same people all the time, every day. And it can really bring out the absolute best of times, and I think the absolute worst of times. And the factors that have made it easier in the past have been open communication, care for each other, and thoughtfulness. And kind of just making little processes, like putting processes in place at the beginning of a tour to make sure that everyone's being checked in with, that everyone's happy to share and feels like there's someone in the touring party they can be close to and share with. But yeah, open communication is always really a lifesaver, I think.
Put it out there. If you're annoyed with someone, just put it out there.
Yeah, and have like a good, I don't know, there's so many amazing tactics and tools I'm sure Amy can share about communication and frameworks for communication that take away the anger element and make it a much more like loving and constructive conversation that can take away the anxiety and burden, I think, when you're feeling tense with your bandmates. Yeah.
You're talking about the communication issues. Often it's not necessarily the communication that you need, but that taking time for yourself and looking after your own needs and having those boundaries in place, which are really hard, I imagine, on tour. My touring days were a long time ago, but you know, to actually be able to say, I need time to do this, or I need to go do this, or that's not okay, that's actually crossing one of my boundaries, it's not okay to speak to me like that. And you can do that in a respectful way as well, you know, or just to say, you know, that's old cliche, but, you know, when you did this, it made me feel like this, you know, little simple little tools that people can use to actually communicate. But I think if you're already coming from a settled place yourself and you've done those things to look after yourself, all your self-care kind of routines, then you'll be less reactive, you'll be in a more open space to communicate clearly. And also you're inviting your group as well, right, to take the same approach to themselves as well. So I think, you know, in relation to, you know, what we can do going back onto tour and what we can do when things hopefully go back to normal is, you know, actually making a point of continuing those self-care routines, making sure that you are looking after yourself on tour. And we're talking off camera about, you know, the importance of understanding that come down afterwards and that low that you can experience after performing, and building in some time for that as well. You know, and not just after a tour, but after every performance, you know. Often get people coming to you and go, oh, look, I had a great performance, and then the next day I just felt horrible and I'm not sure why. And just recognizing that that is just part of the cycle, that's all the adrenaline and everything, all that chemical reaction in your body from that performance. Naturally there's going to be a low, and booking in time to experience that low and accepting it and saying, okay, this is where I'm going to be today, and I need a little bit of time out to, you know, rather than going off and being social and then maybe being, you know, at odds with each other.
Yeah, and that unique lifestyle can lead itself to more, I guess, dangerous ways of trying to bring yourself towards that come down as well. So I'm thinking drug and alcohol issues. So do you have any tips when it comes to looking after your physical and mental health when you are living in that cycle of being up and down constantly for weeks on end, or any other self-care practices that could be built into a touring schedule?
Yeah, look, there's so many. I think for anyone, it's about finding the balance that works for you. I'm always recommending to my clients the importance of exercise, in particular at times like this. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of exercise, but particularly after performances, just flushing that cortisol level from the body, you know, and balancing, like it's so good for balancing anxiety and feeling more level-headed, being able to sort of appraise the performance and that sort of thing in a calmer way. Diet, and I know, like, you know, we talk about substance abuse and that sort of thing, and they're boring topics in some ways, but they're so essential to our brain health. And unless those things, unless we're eating regularly and we're eating good food, often, on tour particularly, it's so easy to realise, I've gone all day and I forgot to eat. And then we're wondering why we feel a bit cranky and a bit on edge, and just having that consistency of eating good food regularly, keeping hydrated. They're really simple things, but they make such a difference to how you perform, and they're easy to ignore because they're so simple.
What about you, Parissa? Have you incorporated any self-care practices into your touring schedule, like things that you like to do to look after yourself?
Yeah, I think, Clive, you were touching on expressing needs to the group on tour. I think that's a really big one for me. I've kind of made a point of sharing that I need like some time during the day to go for a walk by myself or to exercise. I also, every day, regardless of on tour or not, I get up and I journal. And I have a specific feelings journal where I write anything I'm just feeling, whether it's anxious or stressed or angry or happy or any feeling. And then I also have like an account of where I've been and what I've done. And that has helped a lot because it means that the first thing in the morning I can get up and dispel any feelings of, the performance the night before or anything that's happening, and then kind of continue on with my day with a fresh start. And I also always read a poem or something inspiring, or an inspiring quote to kind of just start off. And that's really saved me. If I'm feeling really up for it, I'll meditate. But that's like actually takes a lot of self-discipline. Yeah.
Takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. Yeah.
Something that we've been building into our artists as writers is having a mental health writer. So ensuring a dressing room is available for our artists an hour before a show, ensuring that there is space to do yoga, ensuring there's a quiet room for them to meditate, equipping them with the right apps like Headspace, and
Cool.
ensuring that's happening for artists. And I feel like a lot of booking agents are saying that more and more artists are jumping on board with that now. And then also, of course, like a physical health writer, especially people with substance issues. I've seen, alcohol-free writers, drug-free writers, etc. Just ensuring that people are being properly looked after on the road. And it is a whole team effort as well. You can't just leave the one person to their own devices, hoping that they look after themselves.
Yeah.
It's making sure everyone is in it together.
Yeah.
So talking about being in it together, so when supporting your bandmates, or for me as a manager, my artists, what sort of things should you be looking out for signs that people aren't doing so well?
I think when working together in such close teams, I've always found it helpful to make sure that there's always a friendship existing outside the business or kind of like band performance aspect of life together. So I think always making sure that we're doing things like hanging out with our other friends or going for coffees or just catching up and making sure that we're connecting on a personal level with everyone that I work with has been really helpful, because it means that when things aren't right with someone, we've already got that friendship, and it's things like, avoidance or kind of staying in a lot, or behaviors that this is what I've just noticed in different friends that have experienced things. But yeah, kind of things that aren't normal to their personality. But maybe Amy, I guess, can share more about these signs, because
I think they're really good points.
Yeah.
If you notice anyone that you're on tour with that is withdrawing from their usual behaviour, that, personality changes, maybe changes in the way they're looking after themselves, and their involvement in things, like if they're not doing things that they'd usually do, or they're not turning up when they're meant to be somewhere, that kind of thing. But also the way they're speaking, their thought processes and their attitudes to things. So if you're noticing people saying, I just can't be bothered to do this anymore, or, I'm really useless, I can never get anything right, that kind of guilt conversations, or I just don't think I can go on, any of those kind of thoughts, and to be speaking like that. I think they're some of the biggest indicators that maybe something's not right with them, and that maybe it is worth having a conversation. Because, it's easy to assume if somebody, I think, is a bit withdrawn, that they're just like, they just want their own space. And they may, but sometimes asking a simple question's enough to find out, and just to check in with them.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question. This hits home quite a bit for me. 2 years ago, I had a musician I worked with commit suicide just ahead of a tour, and Parissa, you probably
I haven't
knew.
met him, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I guess in that case, a few of us did notice that this musician was struggling, and we were kind of, people would say, we think he's depressed and we don't know what to do. So if you do notice that someone is struggling, how should you approach it?
Look, I think you've always got to be willing to start the conversation, and I think a lot of people feel if you ask someone if they're suicidal, that'll perhaps make them more suicidal, and the research doesn't back that up. So be willing to say, hey, I've noticed, and be specific if you can, I've noticed that you're not coming to do anything with us anymore, or I've noticed the way you're talking has changed. Give them some kind of evidence, shall I say, that you're not just making things up, or not just that. And then say, look, is everything okay with you? How are you feeling? And that just being there and asking and being present and being willing to have that conversation can actually be a great opportunity for people to open up in a space where they don't necessarily feel they can. So be present, ask, don't judge, don't dismiss what they're saying, just actually be there with them.
Yeah.
And try to ascertain, I think, from a practical point of view, you need to be able to ascertain, is this person at risk? And that's a bit of a heavy topic, but, to just be very blunt and say, are you having suicidal thoughts? It's okay to ask that question, do you have, if they're saying yes, do you have any intentions on following through on it? You can be that blunt.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, it's actually a relief to talk to somebody about it, just taking that time to be there in a non-judgmental way. But also, if you feel like somebody really genuinely is at risk, you need to get them help. You need to encourage them to get help, and if you're really concerned for them, to actually intervene and get help for them. And that's not always easy to do, but it could be, make the difference.
Yeah.
This is making me think about the importance of picking the right team for you. I think if you have that luxury and opportunity to get to know the people that are going to be your tour managers or even management and things like that, and pick people that you think, if you're starting out, and pick people that you think will really understand you and understand your bandmates and be there for you and be there to assist in times of crisis or just in general. I think that makes a huge difference, because you want to be able to pick up the phone to a manager and explain what's happening with a bandmate or even with yourself, and know that you have someone trustworthy and supportive on the other side, who's aware of your plans and can make changes and things. Or a tour manager who's aware and trying their best as well to support any mental health things. So, I think finding a team that's really supportive is a huge part of this as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm sure plenty of teams, this musician played with so many different artists that, plenty of teams have had to rethink the way that we've worked and the way that we communicate with our artists to ensure everyone is supported. Is there anything that people should avoid doing?
Well, I touched on a couple of them there. Don't be dismissive. Don't be judgmental.
And I think don't make it about you. I think often people either trying to. I think their intentions are right. They're trying to be empathetic, but sometimes.
Say, oh, that's happened to me.
Sometimes people can make it about themselves, or they can fall into the trap of actually trying to diagnose rather than just listen. And I think unless you're Amy or unless you're sort of a qualified clinician, you're not there to really make a diagnosis about somebody, but perhaps just to recognise if there are signs, then perhaps have a plan for what you should do about those, particularly if you're concerned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So when you suffer so much at the hands of something like a pandemic or the bushfires, it can feel so unfair. But unlike many injustices, there is no one to blame, nowhere to direct the anger and indignation, and so it can get all bottled up or misdirected. So what implications can this have for people's mental health? Amy, might start with you. Big question.
Look, I think there are a lot of emotions when when we're facing any crisis. And I think this goes back to what we're saying, you know, noticing the grief that people are experiencing. And this is about grief, you know, and anger. Yeah, anger's a relevant and important part of a grieving process. But we do know that, you know, bottling it up doesn't help. As with any emotion, bottling it up doesn't help. Although it's tempting to look for someone to blame, often there isn't, or there are all kinds of sources, but it's not necessarily going to make you feel better to find someone to blame. It can be a temporary outlet, but you know, it doesn't necessarily help you to move through that. So I suppose when we're looking at any grieving process, we're looking at being able to experience those emotions, to recognise that you are going to go through all kinds of levels. You know, if they talk about the stages of grief, you know, you're probably familiar with some denial and bargaining and anger and sadness, you know, that you're going to go through them, but they're not linear. You're going to go from one to the next, you know, and by actually owning that emotional experience that you're having, being able to sit with and say, I'm so angry, you know, naming, I think you talked about at the beginning, just naming how you're feeling, naming the anxiety that you're experiencing, saying, you know, I really feel so angry at the moment, I really feel so sad at the moment, and knowing that that emotion's not always going to be there. So, you know, I think for a lot of us at the moment we are experiencing a lot of grief, and, you know, that idea of, what do they call it, anticipatory grief, you know, like, you know, it's grieving this future loss, you know, all these things that could be lost, you know, coming up, be it events or certainty of, you know, financial certainty and that sort of thing. So being able to just sit with it at times, and I know that's not always easy, but often that's how we can move through it a lot quicker.
And are there other healthy ways that people can express that anger and frustration as well, rather than just sitting with it?
Absolutely. And look, you know, you're talking about creativity in this time, and you know that sometimes that can be a great outlet. If we're thinking of emotion regulation, we want to be able to name it and acknowledge it and know that, you know, and accept it, that it's there, but then find useful ways, be it getting involved to do something about the injustice that's happened, you know, or creating something to express how you're feeling, rather than what may be tempting at some points of, I don't know, punching a wall or getting cranky at other people that you love or that sort of thing, you know, which, you know, can be easy things to fall into.
Yeah.
And maybe even reaching out to friends and family and trying to be there. I think
be there for others.
it's such a, like, all these things that we've talked about are so common for so many people that sharing and reflecting together, I think, can actually, at the right time and in the right headspace, can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
No, we're not alone in all this.
Yeah.
Clive, is there anything else you would like to add?
I think one of the really great things that, as we touched on earlier, seeing the creativity, seeing the connection that we're experiencing with the artists that we love, and just actually sort of recognising how we're all taking the time to just be nicer to each other and check in with each other, and you know that's now just becoming a really common part of how we're all interacting. Is you know, it's not going to solve a lot of, you know, the bigger problems, but it might just make dealing with them on a daily basis a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah, actually on that note, I think, you know, one of the newer levels, I suppose, of grief, you know, that have been proposed and it's becoming more popular to incorporate in there is looking for meaning. And I think that's what you're talking about there, that idea that there's a huge crisis happening and there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of sadness, but there's also really interesting changes emerging for people and an opportunity to adapt, you know, and to find value within it. No, that's not to say that negates the challenges, but just that there is actually that hidden values and meaning there to be found as well.
Absolutely.
Really
I think there's a lot of discussion about what's the industry going to look like
Yeah,
after all of this, and so we can all apply ourselves to thinking about that, and not that, you know, big structural changes, but just a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about tonight. If that just becomes standard as we go forward, or we develop new ways of touring or thinking or playing or kind of, engaging with each other, and that becomes the legacy of all of this, then that will be a plus.
And we are always walking to